This is episode 22 of the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about playing until someone gets hurt. I'm your host and life coach, Danita Bremer. Have you ever received a prompting that you ignored for a long time, like 17 years? This podcast is that for me. I'm telling my stories, I'm learning from my past, and I'm inviting you along for the ride because I know my story can help others. I'm not alone, and neither are you. Okay, so today's episode is going to be short and sweet. I heard somebody say something this last week, and it has just been rattling around in my brain. Excuse me. And it has been opening up my mind to a lot of different possibilities. So I speak today not with authority as if I'm somebody who, knows the research and has all the answers, but this is just kind of what I've been pondering on. And I'm going to weave in a couple of stories from my childhood. So the thing that I heard said was that research shows, and I have not verified the research, that across all mammals, all types of mammals, the mammal young play until someone gets hurt. This is like a universal rule of mammals. It's probably a universal rule of all types of creatures, but I don't know for sure. So I'm just going to stick to the all mammals. And the teacher that I was in class with that mentioned this, she talked about it because she said it helps us learn boundaries. And so I just been mulling that over in my mind about all mammal young play until someone gets hurt. And so it made me think about my childhood. And I don't specifically remember playing with my siblings or my cousins, like the young in my family, until someone gets hurt. I mean, I know that happened for sure. Like we're kids, that's just how it goes, right? I couldn't remember any specific incidences of that, but I did realize that this rule might also apply to adult mammals, at least in the human kingdom. Because when I was young, my dad would tickle us a lot. It was just like one of the ways he showed his love and connection and things like that. And actually, as I reflect on kind of the animal kingdom as a whole, I do think that there are several species of animals that play in this way, right? But there was a pattern to it. Dad would come and for whatever reason, he would start tickling us, and us girls, we would laugh and shriek and scream and all of these until like the volume got higher and higher and higher until my mom would say, "Danny, quit it. Stop tickling them. They're getting too loud," right? And so she would kind of put the kibosh on it. Now, this isn't an example of us playing until someone got hurt, although like I said, I'm sure that happened, but this reflection on that pattern in my childhood, as well as an experience I had with a client this last week, in which she was talking about how her mom was always very, very concerned with anybody getting hurt, right? So she would always say like, "Don't get hurt. Be really careful," right? And I'm sure this is common. My parents did this too. Like it's not just this one person. But my client described it as if her mother was overly concerned with getting hurt or being in pain or something like that. And it was just really fascinating to me because it came up around this idea of boundaries. My client had said, I just don't know that I was really ever allowed to explore and figure out who I was." So I'm going to totally circle back and like all these things up. But because I had already been reflecting on this idea about mammal young playing until someone gets hurt, and that being about a boundary thing and the young learning boundaries, it made me think that what happens when we're not allowed to do that? What happens when we're not allowed to play until someone gets hurt? That it gets stopped before someone gets hurt. And I came up with a few things that I think are possibilities. The first one is that our joy, right? Play and joy really go together. Our joy is turned into something bad. And this kind of goes back to the episode where I talked about wanting a tennis skirt, where like desire turns into something bad. I think this is a similar concept here. When our playfulness, our joy becomes like a wrong thing, then we start to get confused in our minds, in the circuits in our minds about whether joy is good or bad. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that I've alluded to is that you don't really learn boundaries. You don't learn where you end and someone else begins. And I really love thinking about boundaries in that way. Now, it's not like a classic definition when we're talking about boundaries, like I set a boundary, right? I'm talking about a more general definition of learning how to be in relationship with people, learning how to speak up for yourself, advocate for yourself, and be in relationship, learning just how to navigate life with other people, right? Where do I end and you begin? Now, some people have really tight boundaries. They know very specifically what their identity is and what they like and what they don't like and their preferences and all those things. And so that kind of person may not need to play until someone gets hurt, or they might be the kind of person who got hurt very easily or was very sensitive, kind of thing. So their boundaries are very small. Another kind of person who has very large boundaries does need to play until someone gets hurt, so to speak, in order to find out where that boundary is, right? And I think it's this, a lot of this is also learning where other people's boundaries are. So, other people that we're in relationship with, where are their boundaries? And do we want to honor them? Of course, we don't have to honor other people's boundaries, but usually, like in families and things, it makes for a more peaceful, cohesive relationship when we find out and then honor where other people's boundaries are. Of course, if our boundaries are different than where somebody else's boundaries are, then that's when, the real learning begins. The other thing that I was thinking about in relation to this is that if we never get to explore where the boundaries are for ourselves, then we don't really get to learn who we are. And I think there are so many problems with this. The first one is that it's kind of like this feeling of walking on eggshells, like, is this okay? Is this not okay? And you don't ever really fully build confidence in yourself and trust in yourself or others. So what came up for my client in this session was that she was saying that she wasn't ever really allowed to explore freely without judgment or without her mom kind of intervening and saying like, no, you can't do this or you should do this or whatever. She said that her sister actually had explored some boundaries and she was able to learn from that. And she didn't need to explore those boundaries. But now what she's dealing with is not being able to really speak up, speak her mind without feeling all kinds of shame and guilt. Right. So I think that there are kind of long term consequences when we're not allowed to play until someone gets hurt and learn boundaries and learn by our own experience. So that is kind of what I was thinking about today. Um, and it really helped me to see, even like as a parent for my own kids, it is a thought that I use quite often when my children fight or argue. I just kind of previously to learning this idea, I just always thought, well, they're learning how to navigate relationships. But now I'm totally going to adopt the thought that they're learning their own boundaries and other people's boundaries and how to honor those relationships and those boundaries, and they're learning really who they are in the world. And now that I see it that way, It's not that I'm going to love when they fight and argue with each other, but at least I can see it as kind of a necessary step in their development, and that it doesn't mean something terrible has gone wrong or that I'm a bad mother for, my kids fight or argue or anything like that. So if that is helpful to you, I hope that you take it and run with it. Otherwise, anything here that I say that's not helpful, that goes against what you believe, like, you totally do not have to um, take any of it. Do not act like any of this is, set in stone law. This is just sort of my own pontifications and things that I'm thinking about and things that are helping me. So that is enough for now. And so are you. Until next time, go be you and follow the spirit. I would be ever so grateful if you would rate, review, and share the podcast because things like shame always want to hide. You never know who's struggling, but doing these simple actions might help somebody who needs it. I'd also really love to continue the conversation over on social media. You can find me at Facebook and Instagram at Danita Bremer Coaching. Have a great day.